Listen-only mode.
Good morning and welcome everyone to the Growing Concerns webinar for May the 16th. We will be starting the webinar right away. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them into the question section of the GoToWebinar menu, and we will try to make sure they get answered before the end of the webinar. So whenever you're ready, Lionel, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Linda. We'll get started here right away. I'd like to welcome everybody to Growing Concerns for May the 16th. For this week's webinar, we're going to look at doing some weed identification, and the reason for that is we're not going to be too far off some producers doing some in-crop spraying over the next little while here, and kind of just to go through a few of the weeds that we're seeing more and more of, and just help to, I guess, identify some of them. And then we can look at the control methods once we have them identified. We have Nazir Sheikh. He's the provincial weed specialist with MAFRE. He's on as well. Nazir, can you hear me?
Yeah. Good morning, everybody.
Yeah. Good. Me and Nazir are going to do this presentation together, and what we're going to do is we're going to go through some of the slides, and as we're going through, we'll be making comments regarding the weeds, and I guess if we got questions, just follow Linda's instructions, and we'll try to answer them either during or at the end of the presentation. I guess with that, we'll get started. First white weed I wanted to talk about is stinkweed, and what I'm wanting to do is show you a seedling stage of the weed, and then some of the more mature stages of the weed, and then maybe talk a little bit about each of the weeds so you can see some of the descriptive as to things to look for when you're out in the field. So there's the seedling picture of stinkweed. And then this is a more mature stage. One of the things about stinkweed is it can be a winter annual as well, and because of that, we get a lot of it flowering early in the spring. So when you're, that's why right now, if you're going out in the field, you'll see some of it flowering and some of it still in the seedling stage. And so can be a little bit confusing at times when you see it at two different stages, but this stage would have overwintered. So when you look at some of its characteristics, it's basically a hairless plant. It often grows in the rosette stage, in a rosette type stage. So when you look at slide 1 there, when I showed you the seedling, you could definitely see that. One of its characteristics is when you bruise it, or if you were to break some of the leaves off or break the stem, it does have an odor. I did mention the winter annual part of the winter annual portion of it, and because of that, it can flower early in the year. Often you'll see it in clusters in the field. I know I was out in the field last week when I was getting some pictures, and I found one field where it was like a mat in places of stinkweed. And it can be controlled fairly easy with the burn-off in the spring, especially the winter annual stage. And then in crop, there are several chemicals that are available, whether you're looking at a cereal crop or an oilseed. And Nazir, if you have anything to add as I'm going, just interrupt and come in, okay?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So far so good. Yeah.
The next one I wanted to talk about is lamb's quarters. Lamb's quarters is fairly distinctive seedling stage and actually as it grows. Again, one of the characteristics of it is the kind of a light powdery type grayish on the leaves. Kind of like a silvery gray kind of particle on the leaves. The young plants, if you're looking at them closely, if you look on the underneath of the leaves and the stems, a lot of times they'll have a pinkish type color to them. Again, it's a fairly easy weed to control in crop with most broadleaf products. And here's just a stage, a little bit larger plant, but then I found there was a smaller plant as well beside it, and you can see the pinkness of the stem and the underside of the leaf. A little harder to see there, but again, the pinkness of the stem anyways. So couple good hints, the silvery powdery on the leaves and the pinkish on the stems, and again, easy to control and with most products out there. Kochia, a weed that's becoming a pretty big problem in a lot of areas, probably because of the way it grows as well as how it adapts itself to the areas. And as a seedling, it's very small and easy to control. There's lots of hairs on it. That's one distinguishing characteristic, is it's lots of hairs on it at a seedling stage. It's a flushing weed, and that's probably one of the reasons why it's harder to control. Just because of the fact is if you don't have a crop that is very competitive, it'll germinate throughout the growing season, and it seems to be able to adjust its maturity to produce seed accordingly. So it tends to be able to still produce seed in most years. Like I mentioned, it likes to grow in areas that normally crop isn't very competitive, so saline areas is where we definitely see a lot of it in the southwest here. It is fairly easy to control as a seedling, and as a seedling, you know, we're talking this size and maybe just a little bit bigger, but once it gets past the 4 to 5 inches in height, it becomes a lot harder to control. And I guess one of the biggest concerns with it is its development of resistance to group 2 products, as well as you know, recent reports of some glyphosate resistance in some areas as well. So because the weed is a flushing weed and is adaptable, we're starting to see resistance grow in it quickly, and because of that, we're going to be running into some problems for controlling it. So I guess the big key with kochia is if you've got a problem in your field, is try to grow a crop that's very competitive, control of the weed early, and that's probably your best methods. The other thing is that on saline areas, and we see this quite often throughout the growing season, if the crop does start to die off, and in these areas the kochia seems to come, mowing it, keeping it from going to seed would be a benefit, just because if you don't stop it from going to seed, it'll form seed, and then in the fall forms that tumbleweed, and it spreads the seed over a large area. Do you have anything to mention regarding the resistance of glyphosate?
Yes, actually glyphosate-resistant kochia was observed a couple of years back in Kansas, and this year, unfortunately, it has been confirmed in southern Alberta. So we have glyphosate-resistant kochia in Canada now. That is a matter of concern because especially in Manitoba we have kind of a minimum tillage or zero till system where glyphosate is one of the major herbicides. So we'll have to be very careful about about the kochia that is in Manitoba to see it doesn't get resistance to glyphosate. There is one more new herbicide that has come out for controlling kochia. It is called Authority. It was launched just last year, and it's a very good herbicide for controlling kochia, which is resistant to group 2, and it can be applied in peach, chickpea, sunflower, flax as a pre-emergence or pre-seed herbicide. And but we have to be careful regarding its restrictions concerning the pH of the soil and the organic matter content of the soil. Yeah, and just to wind up, kochia and lamb's quarters both belong to the same family. It's the goosefoot family.
Okay, good. Thanks, Nazir. That's a good point about Authority. It definitely has helped in the Southwest here with producers for growing sunflowers. Kochia always seemed to be a problem because in the fall there would be lots of kochia in the bottom of the stands of sunflowers. So hopefully the Authority is going to help out there. There's just a little bit bigger picture of kochia and kind of getting to the stage where you're wanting to look at control. Otherwise, you know, anything a lot bigger than this is going to start being harder to control. Next one I want to talk about is flicksweed, and again, flicksweed. It's when you look at the plant, it's fairly easy to identify as in the seedling stage. There are a couple other weeds that have the similar growth, but when you look at flicksweed, the first two true leaves are lobed. The other leaves are finely divided. It's a gray to green color. Now, it's always kind of hard to distinguish that, but when you look at it, it's not a dark green or a bright green. It's kind of got that grayish green, almost like it's got some hairs on it, but it doesn't. It's just got that kind of that grayish green kind of color to it. And there are some fine hairs on it. Sorry, there was, and it's flicksweed is easy to control in crop. We normally don't have too many producers having a flicksweed problem. One of the things that I did see, and actually had a producer that brought in some weeds yesterday, and he brought in some flicksweed that was probably about this height, and he did a burn off, and he went at 3/4 of a rate of glyphosate, and it was enough to slow it down. But one of the things you got to remember is a lot of these weeds get started, you know, early or as a winter annual, and they get going quick, and they're harder to control. He was concerned he wasn't going to get the weed, the weed wasn't going to die for him because it was the rate he went at, and basically he set it back, but it was at that rate it wasn't doing a great job on it, that's for sure. So again, just a caution when you're controlling some of these weeds to make sure if you go out in the field and check if they have established and are this stage when you're going to spray your burn off, you probably need to be going at a higher rate. In crop, most of the products are fairly good, but again, just a caution that if it's this big before the crop is coming up, it's going to be fairly large by the time that you're ready to do in-crop spraying, and then your choice of products is limited and a lot more expensive.
I would like to add one more point regarding flicksweed, that this weed is also an early spring food source for flea beetles. So especially in canola fields, if you can get rid of this weed as early as possible, then the threat of flea beetles is also reduced.
Okay, yeah, good point, Nazir. Next one I want to talk about is buckwheat, pretty common weed in the southwest or throughout Manitoba. Pretty easy to identify when it's small. It's got the two cotyledons and then the nice big spade-shaped leaf for the first true leaf. Cotyledons, if you look, they're about 120 degrees to each other, so they've got that distinctive pattern. And the arrow-shaped leaf, the first true leaves are arrow-shaped. Again, buckwheat, fairly easy to control in early stages, but the problem again with it is that as that plant matures, it becomes harder to kill. A real big issue when we get into growing pulse crops, especially peas or lentils, it can become quite a control issue because a lot of the products are good for controlling buckwheat when it's in this stage here, but as it gets a little bit bigger, just getting harder to control. This picture here just lets you show some of the amount of buckwheat you can get in areas. So this is a large population of buckwheat, and you know, again, this field, nothing had been done with it as of yet. So if the producer was to seed in that without doing a burn off, this buckwheat is going to be fairly big by the time he comes to in-crop spraying. And again, limiting his choices of products and increasing his cost. And I was also in that same field. We must have had tame buckwheat in there at one time, so quite a big difference in plants between the tame buckwheat and wild buckwheat. So easy to distinguish between the two of them there.
Okay, couple of more points regarding buckwheat. That it is one of the most common broadleaf weed in the prairie region. And the second thing is like another identifying feature of buckwheat is the formation of a kind of a papery sheath-like structure at the nodes. It's usually called the ochrea. It develops a little later in the plant stage. So that's another identifying feature of the wild buckwheat.
Good. Next one I'm going to talk about is cleavers. Cleavers has kind of been around for a while, but it was kind of a north of #1 highway weed for the longest time in our area anyways, and has recently started moving south over the last 3 to 5 years and is now starting to become fairly common in a lot of the fields in the southwest here as well. One of the few distinguishing characteristics of cleavers is it's got a square stem with stiff hairs that point downwards, and it helps it cling to clothing and to hair. So there's the stem. You could definitely see the squareness of the stem, and you can see the hairs on there. Now you'd need to look a lot closer to see that those hairs are actually pointing downwards, but the square stem is a definite giveaway for it. Also that the leaves are in whorls of 4, and when you look again at the picture, you can see that there's 4 leaves in each whorl. So that's another distinguishing characteristic of it as well. It can be a winter annual, and that's probably the most hard to control part of cleavers, is that the winter annuals get established, and in the spring they start growing early, and they become very hard to kill, even with the burn off. The half rates, 3/4 rates of glyphosate aren't hard enough on it to control it for a burn off in the spring for the winter annuals. And in crop, once it gets to be, you know, that after the 6th whorl stage, you're definitely really limited to products you can use on it, and then after that stage you're you're probably in a situation where you're looking at suppression at best. These winter annuals here are in that 4 to 6 stage, world stage already. Basically picture taken about a week ago. These so again, growing fast, developing fast in the field. So if you don't do some type of burn off to control it, you're going to have major issues with it in a crop. One of the things with the cleavers that, and because of its clinginess, that's where we're getting a lot of the spread of the seed, as well as in canola cleavers. The seed cannot be cleaned out of canola, and for a while there, we were getting some canola that was being cleaned and growing, and I think maybe that helped in the spread of some of it. And so now we've got cleavers that have taken a kind of a foothold in the southwest here, and I think it's just a weed that we need to be on top of. I think if you control the winter annuals, we'll be okay. One weed that we get phone calls every year on is yellow whitlow grass. It starts growing real early in the spring. It's a very small plant. The cotyledons are small. The leaves form a rosette close to the ground. It flowers early in the spring, usually before any seeding has begun or just starting. Usually that's when we start getting our phone calls. Guys are out there seeding and they see this plant flowering out there and they're wondering what it is, and it can grow fairly thick in some areas, but again, it is fairly easy to control with a burn-off or tillage. It's not very competitive because that's about as big as it gets. So here it is flowering. So we're looking at 2 to 3 inches tall, 4 inches tall at the most. So but you can get several of these plants in an area, so they can cover a large area, but again, never really creating any major issues for crop competition or just an issue of taking over areas. So again, not a real problem weed, but just a weed that we definitely get a lot of calls on. Here's a weed that's kind of taken a foothold in the last couple years, especially because of the wet conditions. And foxtail barley is becoming an issue, and we're getting lots of calls on foxtail barley regarding how to control it, what should we be doing with it. And one of the comments I always like to make, I guess, is it's become a problem the last couple of years because it thrives in areas where there's little or no crop competition. And the last couple of years, because of the wet conditions, we've had a lot of areas that hadn't been cropped. The crop that was put in wasn't very good crop. It was very thin. So the foxtail barley was able to get a foothold in those areas and produce seed, and now the seed is there. It reproduces by seed, and so that's one good thing, is because it doesn't have a root system that it's going to be producing like quackgrass or something like that, but it does produce a mat of seeds on the ground where it is fairly thick. One way to distinguish it from some of the other grasses is you got that pale green color to it, and it's got hairs on it as well. It's fairly easy to pick out in the field. It's usually in clumps, and you usually can see the mat from last year or the residue from last year, and that'll help you determine what you've got. Control-wise, I've been emphasizing that we need to look at controlling it in the fall and then get out there early in the spring again, and just as it starts to grow, because that'll really slow it down. And then I really think once we get some crop competition, it won't be very competitive, and because of that, the crop will take over, and we won't. We'll see that it'll slowly go back to the areas where it was more dominant in, and truthfully, those were pasture areas or areas that were low management areas or areas that producers didn't do a lot with, and so that's probably, I guess in my opinion, the best way to look at controlling it. Nazir, have you got any comments regarding the foxtail barley?
Yeah, foxtail barley actually can tolerate wet conditions very well, and also it is moderately tolerant to saline soils. So this is one weed which thrives very well in waterlogged fields or fields which have saline problems. And one of the remedies for fixing it would be also having a proper balance of phosphorus in the soil, because if the soil is deficient in phosphorus, then this weed kind of takes an advantage of that. So I mean, either to reduce the saline situation or to add enough phosphorus so as to have enough phosphorus in the soil that will kind of not give an advantage to the foxtail barley.
Okay, that makes sense when you look at some of these this picture here. When you see this used to be normal cropland, and then the last couple of years not crop, so low phosphate probably because most producers put their phosphate on every year when they're seeding, and so you could see where maybe that makes sense. Good, thanks.
Yeah.
Another weed out there that can be a problem at times, usually not throughout the whole field, but usually found in isolated areas, is roundleaf mallow. Fairly easy to identify as a seedling. It's two arrow-shaped cotyledons or spade-shaped cotyledons. The first leaves, once it starts to develop leaves, they're crinkly and with indented margins. They're cup-shaped. They usually start in areas of old yard sites or difficult to control areas, and that's where they get established. One of the biggest issues with roundleaf mallow is we don't have a lot of chemicals that are there to control in crop, or even besides glyphosate for burn-off. We're kind of stuck with a lot of products that deal with suppression, and so when we've got it showing up in some crops, we really can't do a lot with it. So I guess the key with roundleaf mallow is try to control it in crop or before you're planting, if you've got an area where mallow is showing up, and definitely choose your crop if you've got to plant a weed population issue. Choose a crop that you may have some control measures in it. So something like some of the pulse crops or something like that, you definitely don't want to be sowing in an area where you have a mallow problem. But you can definitely identify it fairly easy. There's the crinkly leaf, the cup-shaped leaf. This one is pretty common, but I always get a lot of questions regarding wild mustard and distinguishing it between it and canola. And the producer saying, I've got a lot of mustard, or I've got a lot of volunteer canola coming, and a lot of times you go out there and it's actually, mustard or canola, not usually the same. So one of the things that, and I've got some pictures of both of them here, but this will be a picture of the wild mustard coming, and what I always like to do is take a look at the first true leaves that are coming, and you could see that they're very irregular shaped. And then when you look at the canola, you can see that the shape is definitely different. The color is different normally as well. You've got a darker, deeper green color a lot of times in mustard. Also, the veins are a lot deeper on the mustard plant. So a couple of distinguishing characteristics right there. as the plant gets older, it's a lot easier to distinguish because the leaves definitely show different characteristics than canola plants do. And they are also a home for flea beetles as well, so control-wise, early on is good with a burn-off. But they're, again, mustard, a lot of products out there that are easy to, that control mustard fairly easy in most crops.
I'd like to add a couple of points over there that wild mustard is much more hairier than the volunteer canola. And also in canola, the upper leaves, they clasp to the stem. That is basically, technically they are sessile. Whereas in wild mustard, the upper leaves have stalk attaching to the stem. And usually in wild mustard, we have what we kind of a purplish tinge at the joints of the leaf and the stem.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to tell from the picture there. That's a couple of good points, and especially the one about the hairs. The wild mustard definitely has a lot of hairs on it. So. Next one I'd want to talk about is narrow-leaved hawksbeard, and it's becoming a problem weed in some areas as well. It again seems to be getting to be a problem in areas where zero tillage is around, but it's an annual or winter annual reproducing by seed. Noticeable barbs on the leaf margins, so that was this comment right here, so you can see the leaves and you can see the noticeable barbs on it. Stems are erect and it can grow up to 1 meter tall. The flowers, when it heads, are a bright yellow color. I mentioned it's hard to control weed in zero-till operations. Once this weed gets established in the fall and starts growing in the early spring, a burn-off is really important because in-crop control is expensive, and if you use the wrong product, you will set it back, but it will come back and it seems to catch up in flowers, and it does take over a big area of your field, or wherever it's established. It tends to be a very competitive weed. There's just a more mature type plant of it, and there's the yellow flower, but it's becoming a bigger problem. And again, it's once it gets to certain stages, it's definitely harder to control. So a lot of times, just your regular burn off may not be the answer if you've got it established in a field and it's gone to seed a couple years. You may need to be doing more than just a glyphosate burn-off.
And one more point with this weed is this weed thrives very well under limited moisture conditions also. So if there is a kind of a dry spell, this weed can still survive well.
Okay, good point. The next one I want to talk about is Canada thistle, and again another fairly common weed, very distinctive seeding characteristics. You can see the barbs on it, and there's just a little bit early picture of the seeding. It's got large cotyledons. Leaves are irregular and have sharp spines. One of the biggest things with Canada thistle is its root system and how it is able to spread and develop and kind of get a stand in your field because it grows from root. Again, a fairly common weed, easy to identify. Big thing with it is if you've got it established in your field, a good pre-harvest or post-harvest practice will definitely aid in getting it under control. Pre-harvest, in my opinion, when it's flowering or in the bud stage, is probably one of the best times to get control of it. And if that's not an option for you, then definitely be looking at a post-harvest. but making sure that the plants have had some time to come back from swathing or strike cutting. In crop, there are several products that can be used for control and have been very successful for year-long control. I guess one of the cautions is some of them are really good, and it almost affects your pre-harvest application because they slow them down so much that they're really not in a good enough stage when it comes for your pre-harvest to get good control of them. So I guess depending on the severity of the problem in the field, sometimes the option is having to hit them hard, but if you can only have a few plants, if you got enough to set them back, and then you can hit them again in the fall. So, but again, just a weed that's fairly common, been around for a long time, and we've dealt several years in controlling it. White cockle, another weed that's out there that's we don't get a lot of calls on, but it can or has been established in fields and can be a problem. But again, we don't get a lot of calls regarding it. It's got hairs on the margins of the true leaves, so if you look at the picture, you could definitely see hairs on the margins. When it starts to mature, you get white flowers off it. The flowers are broken down into kind of 5 notches sort of thing. One of the characteristics is the calyx are up behind the head and behind the flower, and it tends to be very sticky and has several green lines on it. There's another weed that I'll be talking about a little bit later that's similar to this one, but it's more distinct with the calyx. But this one here, again, just basically sticky behind the head, and not a big weed right now, or a weed that hasn't created a lot of I guess problems in this area. What about your area? And is there any comments on white cockle?
No, not a major problem here.
Okay, good. Night flowering catchfly. This is another weed that's starting to create some problems in some areas out here. Again, it's an annual or winter annual, and usually it's the winter annual part of these weeds that is causing the problem. The entire plant is covered with soft, sticky hairs. This is the one where, when you look at the calyx behind the flower, there's actually 10 of these predominant veins that, if you can count them. So that's one way that you'd be able to distinguish them. It's sometimes mistaken for white cockle, as I mentioned. But again, it seems to be more predominant in the area, and we're definitely seeing it in areas where guys are doing zero tillage. And I think what's happening is we were in that half-rate burn-off for quite a few years of glyphosate, and a lot of it was not killing these weeds. It was just setting them back a little bit, and then by the time it came to in-crop control, the weeds were too big for some of the products we were using, so then these products were able to go to seed, and now they've established themselves in fields. And so I think what we need to do is we need to be definitely looking at the rates we use for burn-offs, either before or after seeding, and then revisit those fields to make sure we got good enough control and choose the right product for in-crop. But between night flowering catchfly and narrow-leaved hawksbeard, those couple of weeds have definitely established themselves in several zero-till fields. Cocklebur, this one is as a seedling is pretty easy to identify. The long, narrow cotyledons definitely are a nice giveaway for it. First two leaves are paired, and then the next leaves are alternate. As it gets bigger, the leaves definitely change on this, and this can grow to be a fairly tall plant, 2 to 5 feet tall. But these leaves definitely get a lot bigger as the plant matures, and you can definitely see that as it's larger, the leaves are almost like maple leaves. And then the common characteristic when it goes to seed is these burrs that tend to stick and cling, and that's how we get seed spread on it. So again, a weed that's not a huge problem in those fields, and a lot of the products that we're spraying definitely get control. Seeing problems with this weed in sunflower stands in the past, and hopefully now with some of the products that we're using we'll be able to get control. But if it never got controlled as a seedling or early on in the spring in sunflowers, we definitely seen them kind of get a foothold in sunflower fields in the past. Next one is fleabane. Fleabane is, and I didn't have, I guess, a picture of a really small seedling, but you can see, again, established fairly early. It's getting fairly big already. Several leaves, and it sometimes is mistaken for horsetail, and I've got a picture of horsetail, and we'll wonder why right away it is, but because it just has so many leaves that develop before it starts to extend, it looks like just a clump of leaves. You can see all the different leaves that are there as they're coming out, and this plant is only about 3 or 4 inches off the ground, so there's a lot of leaf material there already, and so sometimes can be mistaken with horsetail. But long, narrow leaves, and so that's one easy distinguishing characteristic of it. And theirs is, as it starts to push out a bit, you could see again just a large cluster of leaves, and then as it gets bigger, so again, just a weed that again, not a super major problem, but a weed that's out there, and then you'll see it in a lot of fields, but again, one that's really hasn't created a whole bunch of problems.
Lionel, if you can go back a
couple of
slides. Couple of slides back, one more identifying feature of that weed. If you show the seedling stage, if you can see on the leaves, like midway somewhere, you see a very distinct kind of a notch or kind of a pointed thing. That's another identifying feature of that weed. If you look at, yeah, right there, yeah, that's another identifying feature of that weed. And another thing I would like to add about this is this weed has also been identified to be glyphosate resistant in Canada. This is the second weed which has been identified to be glyphosate resistant. So have to be very careful regarding this weed, especially the seeds of this weed are airborne. They can spread by wind, and that's why it becomes a major problem, especially in zero kill conditions, where the only option we have is pre-seed burn down. And also this weed thrives very well under a lot of moisture. Like last year we had a lot of moisture and rains, and this weed did very good under those waterlogged conditions. So these are some other features of this weed.
Okay, great. Yeah, and that's these pictures were taken last year, and it was, like I said, there was easy to find, that's for sure. There's a picture of horsetail, and I mentioned that sometimes it says that you can often mistake, it can be mistaken for fleabane, and I put horsetail because I actually get more calls on horsetail and scouring rush because they're they're so similar in control, but I shouldn't say so similar in growing and the difficulty of controlling. But we're having a lot more issues with scouring rush in the Southwest, especially after the last couple of years of wet conditions. And both of those weeds are pictures. They both belong to the horsetail family. They're both perennials, and they establish from underground rootstocks. They're very common in wet, moist areas, and definitely have shown their presence over the last couple of years, especially out this way. One of the things that we're finding it difficult to control them is trying to find the products that will work on them. Glyphosate, in some cases, has worked, but the problem is because of the lack of leaves, just getting product on them and trying to control it is difficult. And what we're finding actually is tillage seems to be our best option right now, and which isn't a great option for some of the zero tillers, but I noticed this this spring, and it was in several fields, seems to come in from road edges, and then once it starts going into the field, it seems to just take large areas, low wet areas. Again, very common in, for it taking over those areas. And this year, a lot of producers were just out there disking it, and I think once we get some competition back in some of those areas, that we'll get some of that back. But for the first couple of years here, until we can get them worked down and under control, we're going to have to deal with it for a bit here. Nazir, do you have any comments on the scouring rush?
Yeah, one more point I would like to add is glyphosate is a good herbicide that can take control of this weed, but the important thing is we have to have an additional adjuvant or a sticker added to the spray solution, because as Lionel mentioned, there are not many leaves on this, so we need to have an additional sticker so that the herbicide can hold on these kind of a waxy stems, and then the herbicide can penetrate into the plant. So one of the
what kind of sticker would that?
I would say one of the good ones is LI 700. It's a good sticker, I would say, and it also has some dip control advantage. Yeah.
Good, thanks, Nazir. One of the weeds that has been a problem the last couple of years as well is ragweed, and we're starting to see it show up in a lot of our sunflower crops. It appears early in the spring. The leaves are deep lobed, and you can see the deep lobes in them. Stems and leaves are a blue-green color, so it's a real darkish type green, and they're covered in fine hairs. On the underside of the leaves, a lot of times it's like a grayish color because of the fine hairs. In sunflowers, I've seen them grow as tall as the sunflowers are. Easy to control in cereal crops, harder to control in sunflowers and pulse crops, but I think with maybe some of the new products, we're going to be a little bit better at controlling it. And there's just another picture of it getting a little bit bigger. Smartweed and lady's thumb, same weed, just often referred to two different names. But again, you can see distinguishing characteristics of the leaves, long and narrow, and the cotyledons are opposite to each other. It's an annual that reproduces by seed. It produces a lot of seed. One of the characteristics that is common sometimes is this bluish finger mark on it. Now, Not always is it there, but a lot of times it's there, and that helps you distinguish. And that's where I got the lady's thumb name from. Again, the long, narrow leaves. It has been a problem in flax crops, that I think is where we've seen our greatest issue in dealing with it for weed control. It likes moist soils, and there's swamp smartweed is another one that grows in the sloughs, and we've seen that in a lot of last couple of years because of the wet conditions. So, but yeah, that's the lady's thumb, or the smartweed. Sow thistle, again, a weed very similar to Canada thistle, has been around a fairly long time. This one is rather large already, probably the winter annual. It's can grow to be fairly high. It's got a hollow stem, and it's fairly deep lobe margin, leaf margin. So if you look at the leaves, they tend to jut in.
Lionel, before you go on too
really
far,
likes moist area.
Lionel, before you go on too far, there was just a question back on the ragweed about different varieties, like the difference between common and false ragweed and giant ragweed, and also a comment on, I guess it's glyphosate and I don't L1 700 for both scouring rush and field horsetail was the question. I guess, should you use?
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so first of all, maybe we can go back to the scouring rush. And Nazir, you were talking about LI 700 with glyphosate, and that would be for both products, right? Or for both weeds?
For both of them, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
okay. And then, Nazir, would you have any comments on the ragweed and the common ragweed and the false ragweed?
Yeah, the common ragweed and the giant ragweed are similar. I mean, they are the same genus, I think. Whereas the false ragweed is of a different genus, like a different category. We have issues with giant ragweed coming in Ontario. It was the first glyphosate-resistant weed in Canada, the giant ragweed. And giant ragweed is fairly tall, going about like 12 to 15 feet, and it has much wider and bigger leaves compared to the common ragweed. The common ragweed is the one we have in Manitoba. We don't have much of giant ragweed here. So that's a good point. We have the false ragweed, but it's not very common either. And the false ragweed is more, it looks more similar to the sunflower rather than a ragweed.
Okay, good, thank you. Okay, the next one is red root pigweed, another fairly common weed and pretty easy to distinguish because of some of its characteristics, but it's an annual weed reproducing by seed. The seed is fairly viable. One of the easy ways to, and it's because of the name, is the red root pigweed, is you get the redness of the underside of the leaf as well as the stem, and that picture doesn't show it as well maybe, but yeah, it's when you look at this underneath the stem and underneath the leaves, a lot of times it's a reddish type color. It requires some nice warm weather to get going, and that's why a lot of times we don't see it out there very early in the spring when you go to look for your burn-offs and stuff like that. You don't see a lot of pigweed But later on, it definitely gets going as the ground warms up. Probably because of that, that's probably why we a lot of times see it as being an issue in flax, because a lot of times flax was sown later, so as the flax was coming up, the pigweed was coming up, and we delayed our spraying of the flax for it to get to a certain stage, and by that time the pigweed was getting too big. So I guess if you're growing flax and you're in an area where pigweed can be a problem, definitely keep an eye on your burn off, because either that or maybe we should be looking at sowing flax a little bit earlier. But I guess everything we want everything to be planted early, I guess. But it's one thing to watch for when you're growing flax, that's for sure. Dandelion, I guess another perennial that is proving to be a major problem in reduced tillage and conventional tillage. Reproduces by seed and by its root system. It's got a milky type juice, yellow flowers, very common, very easy to distinguish. I think the biggest thing with that, and the reason I put it in, is we need to look at controlling it, whether it's in the fall or as a burn off in the spring. And again, because once it gets into crop, we're limited with our products, and we're also looking at a lot more expense.
Before we move on, like in general, like for controlling the perennial weeds, the best time for applying the herbicides is in the fall after the harvest of the crop, and when these weeds have kind of emerged and when the temperature is warm enough, because during the fall what happens is they're kind of saving all their food material and transferring it into the root system. So when we apply like a systematic herbicide like glyphosate, it will go into the root system and will actually kill the entire plant, rather than when we apply it in the spring, when a lot of times just the top is kind of killed.
That's a really good point, Nazir. Hemp nettle, it's an annual reproducing by seeds. Stems are square with this one, similar to cleavers. They're covered with hair, but they're not sticky. The leaves come opposite each other, and once established, can be proven to be hard to kill weed in some crops. I'm getting quite a few calls actually the last year now from producers in the area that are having hemp nettle being one of their harder to kill weeds. And basically, again, if you're not on top of it and it gets going early in the spring. I know I was in winter wheat fields 2-3 weeks ago, and hemp nettle was already growing, and by the time you were to spray in crop, you could have that plant at 5-6 leaf stage already, or even more. And by that time, again, it's going to be harder to kill. So hemp nettle definitely need to be keeping an eye on for staging wise, as well as growth, early growth in the spring.
Okay.
Pineapple weed, a weed that as a seedling you would take a look at it and then you say it's is there an issue with this weed, because sometimes it tends to grow in groups. Really not a very competitive weed. It's an annual reproducing by seed. Once you see it maturing, you can definitely tell, and it's got that pineapple type smell to it, so it's easy to pick out, and it's actually fairly easy to control. So that's all the weeds I had for today. Just a couple comments where we've in the last 4 or 5 years we've been able to put together quite a few pictures of weeds, and we're starting to compile a little bit of a library here. So hopefully by the end of this year we'll be able to have something where you might be able to go to it and and actually take a look at some of these weeds and have like an ebook, but we're still in the process of doing that. And Nazir, is there any comments you would like to make on any of the weed issues or weeds that we looked at today, or some other weeds that I might have not put in?
Just a point on the last comment you made. Actually, the MAPRE has a website where we have all the weeds with very detailed photographs and with a kind of a detailed description about the weed. So we already have a website there where people can access and get some more details about the weeds. And also we have
the MAPRE site?
Yeah, it is on the MAPRE site, yeah. If you type in like Manitoba weeds, or we can easily Google it and can find it. And
yeah,
also we have
there's lots of good information there, yeah.
Yeah, and also we have the Guide to Crop Protection online also, which is on the MAPRE website. So if people want to get information either regarding the weeds or controlling weeds, they can also go online on the MAPRE website and get a lot of good information regarding weed control.
Lionel, I do have a question on how do you distinguish hemp from stinging nettle as a young plant?
Nazir, did you hear that one?
Yes, I don't have a very good answer for it right now, but if you can note a number of that person, probably I can give a call back to him, kind of giving details about the distinguishing features.
Yeah, I'm not.
Actually,
I don't have a picture of stinging nettle, and I'm just trying to think myself, and I just can't think of the characteristic. But Linda, if we can get the name of the person, and we'll put it included with the recorded, as well as get back to that person.
Okay, I can do that.
In fact, there is a very close cousin of hemp nettle, which is called American dragonhead.
Right.
And that looks very similar to hemp nettle, but it has some distinguishing feature compared to hemp nettle in terms of that American dragonhead is the leaves are a little more waxy, and the veins actually reach till the leaf margin, and the cotyledons are rounded with backward pointing basal lobes, whereas in the hemp nettle the leaves are fairly hairy. The veins usually don't reach till the margin of the leaves, and it's way more hairy than the American dragonhead, and it has a very distinct kind of a notch in its cotyledon, which is not found in American dragonhead.
And the American dragonhead, the ones that I normally see are deep dark green color too, right?
Yes, yeah.
Any other questions, Linda?
No, there's just a comment from one of the other FPAs that you see cotyledons on hemp nettle annual, but often stinging nettle is growing from roots.
Okay.
Okay. One more thing before I end the webinar today, and I just wanted to, last week I was getting quite a few calls regarding disease in winter wheat and whether producers should be spraying or putting in a fungicide when they're doing their weed control. I was in quite a few fields, and these are the lower leaves that I was seeing, and you were seeing just a little bit of disease showing up in it. And most of the fields I was in, you know, with some warm weather and growing so fast, you know, I wasn't seeing a lot of reason for putting any fungicide in. However, I was in a couple fields that, whether it be the wet conditions or the lack of fertility, or you know, several different issues, you know, maybe an application would be worthwhile. So I guess the reason I put both of these slides in was to say that a lot of times just to go ahead and do it isn't the answer. I think you need to go out in the field and check and see, and then make the decision from there. If you're spraying lots of acres, you could save yourself a lot of money if you're in a situation like this and not have to put the fungicide in. But you could also save yourself a lot of money if you put the fungicide in and help cure an issue like this. So again, check the fields and just don't go by, I'm just doing it because everybody else is doing it. And I guess with that, we're a little past 10, so if there's no more questions, again, the slide from myself and Linda out of Ceres, and then the other FPAs in the Southwest and South Parkland.
One comment I wanted to make regarding hemp nettle and stinging nettle is that hemp nettle is sometimes confused with stinging nettle, but hemp nettle lacks both the stinging hairs and the stipules. So that's one way to differentiate between hemp nettle and stinging nettle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nazir.
You're welcome.
Okay, so with that, I think we will end the webinar for today. And I'd like to thank Nazir. That was great input, and it worked out really well. So thank you for joining, Nazir.
You're welcome. Yeah.
And Nazir is actually having a day at the university today with weed identification, so he's going to be talking weeds all day.
Yep.
So I guess with that, I'd like to thank everybody, and see you next week.